starting a new series before birth, during life, and after. Understanding really the journey. Starting by saying before birth, because life really begins before birth. We're talking about life. Life doesn't start the moment you were born. Why do you think I say that?
Because you were saying, because we lived before, you were saying that we come here, that it's not the first time we are living this life, our
That is
life.
true too, and I wasn't even referring to that. So what Rivka said is because we believe very strongly, yes, Judaism believes very strongly in reincarnation, and that is almost a subclass within this concept. And I probably will take like 2 weeks, I imagine, to really focus on reincarnation when we get to that point. But I actually was even beyond that.
I think you get a soul after 40 days. After the woman gets pregnant, I think 40 days after, God puts a soul inside the body.
Well, actually, the soul really has a connection really from conception. From conception, there's really a connection between soul and body, as we are definitely going to discuss today. And it's not that it's necessarily inside the fetus. It's not even inside the baby when the baby is first born. The soul enters the body gradually. So no person is born with a soul inside of them. But the soul is absolutely connected. But Menucha is correct in essence, because of course this is the point that I was focusing on, and the point I wanted to, as our initial perspective of beginning this whole series, is understanding that the true life of a person is their soul. And our souls are ancient. Our souls exist since the beginning of time. From conception, there's a link between a soul and the body that's forming. But my life is my soul, which of course goes back to what Rivka was saying of reincarnation. With the idea of reincarnation, it's different bodies, you have different names, you could have different genders, different parts of the world, no different languages, you could look quite different. So why is it you in the end of the day? Because it's your soul, and you are your soul. The soul is the true life of the person. So that soul really, we need to focus on her and her journey, because our bodies are very temporal. They have the form, when they grow, when they develop, when there's birth, when there's life, when there's death. How many years are we talking about? The soul is eternal. We really understand ourselves as a soul and understand our journey before, during, and with a lot of detail after life on this world. The first thing to understand about ourselves as souls is that each one of us volunteered for this mission. God has a need, and he needed a soul to graciously accept the challenge of being me, of being you, of fulfilling whatever God needed for us to fulfill in this lifetime on planet Earth. Every one of our souls, I'm not saying every single detail, but the broad strokes knew what they were getting into. Meaning there is the concept, and it's a very strong idea, that a soul volunteers to come into this world and live this life, the life that God has scripted for me, the life that God has scripted for you. That's really a volunteer mission. It's based on a Kabbalistic concept that this entire world is considered a war. That's based on a verse. The verse says, it's the opening verse of Parshas Ki Seitzei. Ki Seitzei means when you go out. And the verse says in the Hebrew, Ki Seitzei le'melchama al oivecha, when you go out to war on your enemies. And Hasidus explains at length that the war is an allegorical concept besides its physical simple meaning. And it's allegorically the war, the battle our souls and bodies experience in this world. And the classical commentator on this verse, Rashi, says when you go out to war on your enemy, this is talking only about an optional war, meaning whatever the verse is going to continue to discuss, these laws are talking about an optional war. Meaning when the Jews were fighting in the biblical concept, you have optional wars and mandatory wars. Conquest of Israel was a mandatory war. So when the Jews entered Israel and they were injuncted to drive out the 7 nations that lived there, That was called a mandatory war. The Jews couldn't say, nah, they're such nice people, or we don't really need so much land, or we're lazy, we're okay, we'll be have a smaller slice of this beautiful land. It was an obligatory battle, which has certain sets of rules. But there was also the concept of the Jews post the conquest of the original biblical borders of Israel saying, we need to expand, we need more land, or the people next door are really harassing us, we need to deal with them. And the verse calls this an optional war. God's not telling you have to do it, but you're allowed to. And then there's many laws about optional wars. So when the verse is saying when you go out to war against your enemy and all the laws, which Kabbalistically we're told is the battle of our soul in this world, we're talking about optional wars. And based on this, we understand that we're here optionally. We chose it. So why do you think our souls, I mean, were we crazy? Like, what were our souls thinking? Why did our souls choose, or maybe to phrase it slightly differently, why did our souls desire to come into this world?
Because only in this world, soul in the body can accomplish something, can get closer to God in this body to correct things that were not done properly before.
Absolutely. Great answer. Absolutely. Anyone else? Any other ideas? What Rachel said was 100% true. And by the way, there are many answers to this question. Any other ideas? Any other thoughts?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. Why do you think my soul, or why do you think your soul, chose or desired or volunteered to come into this world?
Maybe to help someone else
Definitely.
or to
Definitely.
show the lesson, the example.
Sorry, I didn't catch what you just said, Manufa.
For example, like if the person becomes disabled, I read it's like a lesson, like other people should look at the person and say like, Baruch Hashem, we're not like blind, not deaf, not disabled, like an example for other people.
I see what you're saying. Okay. That could be a very specific situation. Maybe it's, I mean, I don't know. That's I'm not sure where you read that. But I would say more like sometimes souls do come in this world because they need to help another soul, like another person very specifically. And that goes back to what Rivka was mentioning before about reincarnation, that sometimes you come back into this world because there's a person that you need to help. Usually in that type of situation, what it means generally is it's very possible that someone wronged you in a previous lifetime, and because they wronged you and never repented and never rectified the damage, they have to go through a certain amount of suffering. And the person, the soul of the person they wronged, could say, you know what, I'm willing to come back in this world one more time, to give them an opportunity to rectify it. So both souls come back down, the person that was wronged and the person that did the wrong, to give another chance for the person to do it correctly. So obviously a soul who's doing this is an amazing soul, because you say, well, every soul's amazing, so maybe that sounds funny, but it's a very, very amazing, beautiful thing the soul is doing, because it's volunteering to go into another lifetime, and probably a lifetime that has pain and misfortune and suffering, to recreate the situation to help someone else. So there's that concept. And then, as you're saying, there could be other concepts, of how a soul could come to help. Any other ideas?
When we come into this world, this is where we can perform mitzvot. And while performing mitzvot, we're making change. We're bringing godliness into this world. Before we come to this world, in another world, I think it's more pleasant to be there for our souls. We're closer to God. So it's but we're not making a difference, because we can.
Absolutely. Rivka actually just pulled a lot of different ideas into her answer. Everything she said was true. It's all very true. Only here we can do the mitzvot. Only here we can serve God. Only here we can make a difference. There's a need. Yes. Everything you said is in a sense, the most classical, strongest answer to understand why we're back here. Absolutely. Only here, and that's a very pivotal concept I'm going to explain, what's unique only here, that only here we can give to God, only here we can serve. Absolutely. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? We got so far 3 great answers. They were all true. Any other thoughts?
I just have a question,
Sure.
Cyril.
There you go.
Are we always coming voluntarily? I don't
Yes.
think so, right?
Always. Meaning even a soul who is going through a reincarnation, and because they did something wrong, they have to come back down into this world to rectify it. There's still the voluntary element, because in truth, one doesn't have to rectify in this world. One can go to what in the Jewish we call Gehenna, which is nothing like the Christian version of purgatory, but I'm just using that term so people understand the concepts. It's a totally spiritual reality. It's totally to cleanse. But one could get cleansed in Gehenna, an after death spiritual purging, cleansing. So why does the soul coming back down here to get cleansed? Well, for many reasons. That is not really what I want to talk about. I mean, we'll talk about it later. But still, there is the element of choice. Yes, there is the element that the soul made a choice. And it was a choice to come here, and it was a choice, in essence, to help God. Because God has a need. And the soul understands that I can uniquely fulfill God's need by coming back into this world, by coming into this body, by coming into this mission. Meaning, even though we could sort of think of it like, what is it, a marketplace, and all these different like options of lifetimes are in front of you, and you just, I go that one, I go that one. Obviously, it's not like that. Obviously, every soul is perfectly matched with the life it's going to lead, because that life is connected to all the previous lifetimes this soul had. That life is continuing the journey of that soul. But there's still the element of the soul chose it every single time.
So
And it,
do soul have a knowledge of challenges and suffering it will endure in this lifetime, and does the soul accept it and
yes, and yes. Again, not a detailed, like blow by blow, as we live through each thing. Oh my gosh, I could live for a day and like, oh my gosh, that. So it's not like that. They're not getting a detailed blow by blow, day by day, but the broad strokes, yes, they know what they're volunteering for. And the soul accepts that, because the soul senses God's need and their ability to uniquely fulfill this need. This is the lifetime I'm supposed to go for. This is my soul's next journey. I know this is what God needs to happen. God has a need. I can fulfill the need. I want to fulfill God's need. That's really the thought process we went through in saying, yes, 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 I accept. Yes, I accept this lifetime. I accept this journey.
it's almost like this concept for a soul to accept challenges and suffering. It's almost like I'm thinking those are very high spiritual souls, because I just hard for me to
Well,
understand.
I understand sort of what you're saying. Let me try to package this a little different so it makes sense, because I don't want it to sound like so lofty, like you're like, whoa, my soul was really, really, I don't know what she was thinking. A soul, we are at our core soul. Every soul, in essence, has only one desire. That desire is to be with God. That's what the soul wants. The soul wants God. The soul wants a relationship with God. The soul wants to be with God. That's what my soul wants. That's what every single soul wants. Of course, there are levels in soul. There are greater souls. There are lesser souls. But there's no soul, even the smallest of the smallest soul, that does not have that one and only one desire: to be with God, to be fused with God, to give to God. The soul has absolute love for God, absolute awe for God, an absolute desire to be with God. So when there's a need that God has, that I, the soul, can fulfill, God has a need and I can help God's need, that's real. Suffering, pain, problems, those are much vaguer concepts. God's need and fulfilling God's need, that's reality. So it's like the inverse of how we would think, right? To us, pain and suffering is very real, and giving God pleasure is a beautiful concept somewhere out there. But for a soul, it's the opposite. So for soul, the reality of God is what's real, and physicality and the sufferings within a physical realm, I know about them in a very abstract sense, which is maybe how the soul volunteers. Okay, so we're saying that God has a need that this specific soul, can fulfill. There's also another element, which sort of was what Rivka or Rachel was touching on, which is that the soul senses what it can gain from this world. Meaning there is the altruistic desire for God, and there's also our own sense of, wow, what an opportunity. So you could say, well, how does the soul gain from here? She's up there. There is pure godliness. There's only good and only God and only godliness. So she comes here to gain. What's the gain? Well, one very big gain is what Rivka said before. Because here she gives to God. That's a huge gain. That's a huge transformation of her role. Meaning the soul above could be pre a lifetime, post a lifetime, the souls in the Torah, in the Jewish world, we call Gan Eden, a spiritual concept of reward. Amazing, but only receiving. All souls above, to the greatest souls, Moses and Aaron and David and Solomon and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah, all of those souls are only receiving. Here, the soul can give to God. That's amazing. That's wow, which again is both God's need, but also for the soul, wow, that I could give to God. Rivka also touched on the idea that here we can serve, we can do the commandments. So why can't the souls do the commandments? Because for a commandment, you need a physical body, you need a physical world. So no soul above is doing any commandments. Now, that might not sound entirely correct, because we know, or you might have learned, that the souls above in Gan Eden, in the afterlife, study Torah. And they do. They study Torah all the time. But it's not a commandment. It's a tremendous delight for them to connect to God and study his Torah, but they're not being commanded. To be a commandment, you need to be a human being, soul and body, in a physical world. If you're down here as a soul, still doesn't help. Soul and body in physical world, if you're up there as a soul and body, like Moses was for a while, like Elijah is, still doesn't help. You have to be down here, soul and body, to do the commandments. So on one hand, it's amazing to do the commandment, because as I was just saying, when you do a commandment, you give something to God. God needs our commandments. God relies on our commandments. Our commandments help him. Also, there's something else, which also is very special for the soul. Uniquely, only here, only in this reality, only as a soul and body, only when you do a commandment, you and God become absolutely one. You and God are fused. You and God are one. That's impossible in any dimension besides our physical reality. Meaning there are spiritual worlds. There are, in very broad strokes, 4 spiritual worlds. There are myriads of spiritual beings. We can just globally call them all angels, spiritual entities. No angel, no spiritual entity, no spiritual world becomes one with God. It's impossible. It is impossible, not it is impossible to be one with God. God is too overwhelming, and that spiritual being would cease to exist. So in all the spiritual worlds, What are they enjoying? Like, what's going on in reward? Godliness, but not God. The energy from God, but not him himself. The only time you can ever connect to God himself in this world, soul and body, during the time of doing commandment or studying his Torah, as we are doing right now. So we don't feel a thing. I mean, this might feel like a nice class, but we don't feel what my soul is going through right now being one with God. Trust me, you don't feel it. If you felt it, you would also cease to exist. We don't feel it. We can experience it because we don't feel it. But it's and my soul knows that's what's going to happen. And that's like, wow, is that unbelievable? This is actually what it means in Ethics of the Fathers that we study over these months. In Ethics of the Fathers, our sages say a perplexing statement, as there are others. They say it's nicer 1 hour of repentance and good deeds in this world from the entire lifetime in the world to come. And we're like, wow, that sounds like a jip. This is the world of work. This is a world of concealment. This is a world when we go through hard stuff. And the next world is the world of reward. And the sages are saying that 1 hour here is better than an eternity of reward. That does not sound like a very good reward. I want like a money back guarantee on this one. This does not sound right. What do they mean? So the first Rebbe of Chabad explains, yes, that's reward, but this world is nicer. Why? It depends what you're looking at. If the focus is connecting to God, connection to God only happens here. It doesn't happen in the next world. So 1 hour of serving God, 1 hour of repenting, 1 hour of doing the commandment, 1 hour of studying Torah, that's incomparable to a lifetime of the world to come, to a lifetime of reward, because you can't get what you are all experiencing now, what I am experiencing now, what we are experiencing for the duration of this class, no soul above can experience. At this moment, Moses cannot experience what I'm experiencing. Not Abraham either, not Sarah either, none of them, because it only happens here. So 1 hour here is better than eternity there. But then why do I call that reward? Because here I don't feel it. Reward means a pleasure you're experiencing. It's affecting me. It's transforming me, but I don't feel it. Above, the pleasure is a pleasure that you feel. So it's a much lesser intensity, but it's experienced, and the experience is amazing. So that's why the next world, so to speak, where the souls are above, is reward. It feels beyond anything we can imagine. But 1 hour here is more impactful. 1 hour here is more special. 1 hour here could be an hour of you and God being one, and that will never happen above. So that's why a soul can say, wow, to come into this world, wow. Other ideas. Wait, any questions on anything I just said or any thoughts on anything I just said before I go on? Because there's could be a lot of overload here. There's a lot of deep concepts to think about. Any questions on any of this? Okay, so another idea. Here, what the soul can sense that she could gain in this world, or to put it in simple terms, what she is gaining in this world, is she's gaining a level of relationship with God that she can't gain above. So one of the worlds you gain here that you can't gain above. To give to God, we understand. To do the commandments, we understand. But a spiritual level, I mean, it's much more spiritual above than here. Yes, it is much more spiritual above than here. So what's the gain? The gain is that there's a certain type of service of God, which is called Kabbalistically Ru'usa Deliba, which means the strivings or the will of the heart. And that level of relationship is when you serve God irrational. When you serve God and it doesn't make any sense. And you know what? You can only achieve that in this world. Why can't the soul achieve that above? Why did you have to come down here to get that?
It's a concealment.
Exactly. Because above, it's completely rational to serve God. There's nothing irrational in serving God above. In a pure spiritual reality, which is where the soul is before she comes to this world, it makes a lot of sense to serve God. It makes perfect sense to serve God. As Rivka says, God is completely I mean, to a certain degree, completely maybe not, but God is very, very revealed. All that there is spirituality. All that there is godliness. So it makes a lot of sense to connect to God. Conversely, in our world, there's a lot of times where God is not so revealed. And we're a lot of times where it seems very irrational or worse to serve God. It makes no sense. What God's asking makes no sense. What we do for God makes no sense. I think God is blessed because we're crazy sometimes. How we serve him, it makes no sense. So that relationship, serving God when it makes no sense, and that special connection to God that comes when you serve him and it makes no sense, that you can. And here, of course, as I think Rivka sort of touched on, was here we create Mashiach. Do you think Mashiach is a relevant concept for a soul above? Like creating Mashiach, would that inspire a soul to come down here? Do you think Mashiach is relevant for a soul once they did their time in this world, did it correctly, were successful, went up to the spiritual afterlife, are basking in divine reward? Do you think that concept, oh, but come back down, you can create Mashiach, would that have any relevance to the soul?
No.
No? Someone said no. Who said no?
Me, Vega.
Vegas said no. A soul is having a really good life. This world and its problems are very distant. No, I accept that. Any other thoughts?
Well, Mashiach and redemption and the God, and it's like an ultimate goal. That's for godliness to come for Jewish for Jews doing mitzvot, which brings godliness into the world, and um, it'll end up with coming of Mashiach and ushering the millennial of Mashiach, of godliness. Isn't that kind of like ultimate goal for
So
us?
you're saying, Rivka, what you're saying is you think the soul would care about Mashiach because if the soul cares about God, and God ultimately wants Mashiach, and Mashiach is the purpose of creation for God, the soul would want Mashiach for God and therefore would be motivated to come down to help God and create Mashiach.
Yes, that's our kind of ultimate goal. Mashiach and will bring ultimate redemption and godliness into this world, so Hashem can dwell and be revealed.
Anyone else? Any other thoughts? So Fega gave us a thought. Rivka gave us a thought. Any other ideas?
It's impossible to think that the soul doesn't care about Mashiach. I think it's so natural to think that, of course, because this is the final purpose.
So you're saying, of course, the soul cares about Mashiach. This is the point of everything. The soul's spaced out. The soul suddenly is just self-centered. Of course, the soul cares about Mashiach. Makes sense. Anyone else? Any other thoughts?
I'm kind of thinking alongside what Vegas said. I think that soul wants to be with God, where God is revealed in Gan Eden, right? So I mean, I know we're learning today that soul volunteers to come to this world, but maybe what I learned before, my understanding is that ultimately soul wants to be with God in Gan Eden, not in this world.
So Chava is saying, like Fega, Chava is saying, no, she doesn't think the soul would come down to bring Mashiach, because why would the soul want to leave her being with God? That's what she wants. You know what? Things are very, very multifaceted. There's going back to ethics of the father, because Chava's saying, wait, we're saying the soul volunteered, but the soul wants to be above. So in ethics of the fathers, it says, against your will you're born, against your will you die. Meaning, against your will is like what Chava's saying. The soul doesn't want to come down here. The soul wants to be with God. What's come down to this down, 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 down? The more you understand how down it is, the more you understand how weird the soul is, and the more you appreciate what it means to leave that, like what a sacrifice. Of course, doesn't want to come, but at the same time, what I'm saying is also true, because she doesn't want to leave, but she is volunteering. Both are true. Both are true. She doesn't want to leave. It would be like if you're in a bad situation and you have an opportunity to change your situation and you do so, well, that's pretty okay. That makes sense. The soul's in a good situation. Obviously, sometimes very specifically, we could have like we were saying reincarnation. Maybe a person did something wrong. But I'm saying in general, for the bulk of souls, not for a very specific case of a person who messed up and therefore is whatever. But in general, the soul's in a very good situation. Every soul's in a good situation. Some souls are in a better situation, right? Some souls have it better. Some souls did more in this lifetime, and it's really accumulation of lifetimes, and therefore have it better. But a soul's in a good situation. A soul is feeling godliness. That's exactly what the soul wants. So that is a good situation. So Chava is correct. There is the element of against your will you're born, because leave all this, the heights of, and I'm making this so not simplistic to be inappropriate to anyone, but just because I could take any one of these ideas I'm throwing out at you and speak about anyone for a long time. There's so much Kabbalistic information. There's so much Hasidus explaining these ideas. So if we would higher and higher and higher understanding where the soul is, we could appreciate what it means that she doesn't want to come down. And at the same time, she's volunteering for the mission. Not contradictory thoughts. Those are complementary thoughts. Of course, she doesn't want to leave, but she understands God's needs. And as I brought out, she also understands her needs. Not her needs that she's flawed. No soul is flawed. No soul is like, oh, I'm flawed, so I have to come down. No, we're not thinking on a flawed level. There's just the needs of gaining all that this world has to offer, as we just enumerated a number of things that this world has to offer. So the soul doesn't want to leave and volunteers for the mission. Both are simultaneously true. It's not some and some. They're both simultaneously true. And then when the soul is here, she doesn't want to leave, because look what she's doing here. Of course she wants God, but she still doesn't want to leave. And she's not supposed to want to leave. And wanting to leave is not what God wants. And if the soul sort of slips up and leaves unwittingly in a moment of spiritual ecstasy, that's not considered like great, even though it's very spiritual, but it's not considered great. It's considered greater to be in this world. But Chava said, and again, what she said was true, going along Fega's lines of thinking, that, well, of course the soul wants to stay. Why would the soul care about Mashiach? The soul wants to be with God. So there is a reality to all that. Rachel, what did you want to add or question?
I wanted to ask, so after Mashiach comes and everybody is alive after that, people who already passed away, they will be alive again. So all souls will come back here?
Yes. And that's exactly the point I was going to make. So you already jumped to what I was going to say. Yes, that is a critical factor, a very critical point. So what Rivka and Rachel both said, and they were both right. I mean, it's a beautiful concept to think of. Of course, the soul cares about Mashiach. The soul cares about God. If God's whole vision of creation is, I want Mashiach, that's why I'm doing all this. God created the world before time, but we'll date it as 5,784 years ago, with a vision of Mashiach. That was his whole purpose. So if you're a soul, all you want is God, of course you want what God wants. Of course you want Mashiach. If you're needed to make it, of course you're going to do that. That's what Rivka and Rachel said, and they're true. But there's another element, which is what Rachel just touched on now, that's also very critical to understand. The souls above, in the abode of reward, what we call Gan Eden, which is the Hebrew for the words Garden of Eden, not meaning a physical garden. Nothing is physical above. No reward is physical. No cleansing, what we might call punishments, are physical. It's all spiritual realities. But spiritual is real. So in whatever level of Gan Eden they are at, because there are levels, as we will discuss, in essence, they are the most beautiful waiting rooms beyond anything we can imagine. All rewards, all Gan Edens are waiting rooms. They're waiting there because the action happens here. Which doesn't take away what Fega and Chava said. They're right. The souls want godliness, and godliness is above, but they want more than godliness. Like godliness is nice, that's why it's reward. They want to be back here, soul and body, able to serve God, but that sounds like, okay, that's a reincarnation. What do you need Mashiach for? To perceive God. In other words, what the soul wants is a synergy of the best of both options. The soul above, Chava said, Fega said, it's really good. They're close to God. What do they need this reality for? That is true. When you come down here, it's really important. You're serving. That's true. But it feels better up there. That's true. The soul wants Mashiach. The soul wants to come back down, to be soul and body, to have the ability to serve in a physical world where everywhere you look, you see God. They don't want to lose the advantage of Gan Eden. They want to synthesize it with the advantage of being a soul and a body. I want to be an active player. I want to be a mover and shaker. I want to do. I want to give. I want to create. And I want to experience God. So what does that mean? Well, that means I want Mashiach. Because if it's just a reincarnation, so we have all the advantages I just enumerated, but hey, you're like Chav is saying, you're losing what you want. You want to enjoy God. You're not getting that here. True. That's why the soul wants Mashiach. The soul wants a reality where they're in a physical world, in a physical body, but without any of the limitations of physicality on obscuring God. That's what they want. They really, really, really want Mashiach. They really want to be able to serve and at the same time to experience God, to come back down, but not to come back down and be blocked from God, to come down to be able to serve, give, and at the same time feel, experience, and be one with. Like they want all the advantage of being one with God and all the advantage of feeling that experience. And that means they want. And that's really, really almost like a perspective when you're thinking yourself on bringing Mashiach. It's not just for us. It's not just for the 15 million Jews that are in varying levels of suffering at this moment. It's not just for the 8 billion mankind that are in varying levels of suffering through this moment. It's for God. It's for Mashiach himself. And it's for every single soul that's been waiting, some since the beginning of time, to have this ultimate experience. Be here, be in a physical world, be able to be one with God, and feel the experience and continue to exist. Now we are one with God, but we don't feel a thing because we would cease to exist. Only by Mashiach. Be one with God, feel what that means, and exist. Any thoughts, any questions on this?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
So I was thinking, the soul cares about what's going on the earth, right? They care about the relatives that they left and the suffering. So they want to end suffering. They want the redemption. That's why I think of course, they think about Mashiach.
True, but you know what also happens sometimes is that as a person, the longer a person is a soul, disembodied from the body, the more the soul understands the suffering. So they have too good a philosophical acceptance of it. Meaning, like for us, when we suffer, we have to talk to ourselves a lot. This is God, and he's good, and this is good, and God's only doing because it's good, and God only doing because he loves me, and he's cleansing me of my evil, and all that stuff, which is all 100% true. But we have to like tell it to ourselves and tell it to ourselves and tell it to ourselves. By the soul, it's the opposite. Like I was saying before about the opposite perspective, what's real, what's not real. For a soul, God is what's real. Spirituality is what's real. And physical suffering, the soul sees like God's perspective. I love you. I'm doing this because this is the best thing for you. So the soul gets that too much. So again, it sort of depends how long the soul has been away from planet Earth. But the longer, the more the soul could say, I love you. Of course I love this person. And I'm going to pray to God. You know, there is a concept of prayer. It might sound funny for us, but pray to God for you to help this person I love, this relative, this friend. But at the same time, the soul also like understands it, understands why God's doing it. So because of that, there's not that same edge that we experience when we see someone else suffering.
Sarah, what you just said, now I'm just thinking, so that makes sense how soul perceives suffering. And I'm thinking maybe that's a reason, because I sometimes I see some people, they have so much suffering in their life. And now I'm thinking their soul was very lofty to accept that suffering. But then also makes sense what you're saying, that soul doesn't perceive suffering as sharp as we do here within our bodies.
Absolutely. Because what the soul, so you're talking more about going to the idea of like, why in the world would a soul volunteer for this mission? Because the soul understands. The soul understands the gain in it.
Sarah,
Yes.
so after redemption, soul will have here the same pleasure as it has in the world above,
No, she'll have a much greater pleasure.
greater.
Much greater. Because above, the soul is limited to experiencing godliness. Here, by the resurrection, the soul, and all of us living now, and all souls, will have the pleasure of experiencing God. Remember, I said before that right now, we in this class, we are all experiencing God, but we don't feel a thing, which is part of God's system because that's how we could experience it. Because if we had a tiny, like if the veil's lifted for a millisecond and we experienced what right now is happening to my soul, every single one of us would die. It would be such an intense charge, we would literally die. We literally would not be able to handle it. So in this world where we have all these veils obscuring spirituality, we can have the most intense charge, God himself, and we could survive it because we don't experience it. We don't feel it. So it's affecting us. It's helping us. It's changing us, but we don't feel it. That's why in no spiritual reality can any soul or any spiritual being have this experience, because they would experience it and they would cease to exist. You say, what does death mean? You're not physical. But literally the matter of that being would just like, if you mean like crumble, it would just like cease to be that matter. It would just literally like dissipate because that matter can't handle it. So, I mean, there are many, many factors involved. It's not random. There's so many levels and dimensions to understanding this, but only here we can have that experience. By Mashiach, God himself, not godliness, God will be completely revealed. We will all connect and fuse to God every time we serve him, and we will experience that fusion, and we will exist. That is the greatest wonder of Mashiach. Again, it's a very deep Kabbalistic wonder. Not, the wonder is the dead will come back. Yeah, that's cool. The barks of trees will be edible, the wolf and the lamb. There's lots of wonders. But the deepest wonder is that God will be completely revealed within a physical world, and the physical world will continue to maintain itself as a physical world and not cease to exist. That's the deep, true wonder of Mashiach. So the soul will have a much greater experience than it has now. Because all the souls above are having a wonderful experience receiving godliness. Godliness just means like rays, energy from. The soul, by the resurrection, will experience God. And that's why that world is a waiting room for this. Not for this as it is now, for this by Mashiach. There's like this lifetime, we can be one with God, but we don't feel it. The afterlife, disembodied souls, great reward, feeling godliness, not God. And the ultimate Mashiach, where your souls and bodies, without any of the barriers of physicality, the substance of physicality, and no barriers. So you are one with God, and you feel that, and you continue to exist. That's the unbelievable revelation of Mashiach.